I am the newest member of the JLF political education team, which is an all volunteer team. Those of us you see spotlighted here are my fellow volunteers, supported by Jordan, who is a staff member, who you'll also be hearing from tonight. And I'm calling in from Bogota, Colombia. Um, I am the newest member of this team because I just completed the Money to Movement Lab experience at the end of last year. And you'll be hearing about Money to Movement Lab as one option of a way to get more deeply connected to this work throughout this evening. I had a really positive experience. Happy to talk to anyone, as I'll say again at the end about that. And coming out of that, I had a one-on-one with Josh, and he recommended that I join this team. And that has been just a really fulfilling and exciting experience for me. And I think one of the things that has really stood out is that it's the first time that I feel like I'm in a Jewish space where a big part of my life experience, which has been organizing work with Latin American social movements that are deeply steeped in the tradition of popular education here in Latin America, where that experience really feels like an asset and something that's really actively invited in to a space of Jewish organizing. And while that in some ways is probably, an idiosyncratic experience that none of you may share exactly, I think it's actually a really representative experience of what the vision of JLF is for Jewish organizing and for Jewish community, which is really what motivates me to be here and to keep showing up, which is, to have Jewish spaces where all of us are really truly invited to show up with all of ourselves. So, what we're here to talk to you about tonight is how do we fund that movement? How do we fund those spaces so that more people can have the kind of experience that I've been able to have joining the political education team with JLF? So with that, I will hand it off to Josh to get us started with our content for tonight.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. So my name's Joshua. I said this in the chat, but I'm calling in from Brooklyn, and I'm another volunteer on JLF's political education team. So tonight, I'm going to take us through a little bit of history so we can understand both what Jewish American philanthropy is, how it's changed over the last century, try to ground us all in some shared knowledge. But before I do that, I'd love to hear a little bit from folks in the chat. So we've heard about your favorite money songs. I'd also like to know, like, given everything else going on in the world, what brought you here tonight? Why do you think it matters to gather together and learn about Jewish American philanthropy? There's a lot of important things to learn about and discuss. Would love to hear a few reasons, what brought you here. Um, I know for me, I feel really lucky to be part of a very feminist, anti-racist, politically engaged synagogue in Brooklyn. And then I go home and sort of really feel the lack of that Jewish community. And so I kind of aspire to a world where both there are more progressive Jewish institutions and where we could fund those institutions. And in order to do that, I feel like we have to talk about philanthropy. Um, but would love to hear a few answers and I'll read them out. What brought you here tonight? Um, I'm here because the leaders of my yeshiva couldn't make it from Meredith, and I'm a nonprofit accountant in my day-to-day. Interesting. Jen says, I'm a wannabe scholar of philanthropy and social movements. Amen. And one of my entry points to this work was being a grantee of JLF. Celine, my organization is struggling to find progressive Jewish major donors. Totally. Jeremy in St. Louis, I'd love to learn more about how to best connect with donors who are interested in progressive Jewish issues. Some folks are in a strategic planning process, trying to learn about the future, what we could do financially. We're trying to raise money for new organizations, Jewish Partnership for LA. Oh, I want to hear about all these organizations. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Um, Working on a campaign targeting Jewish investments in philanthropy. Amazing. Jewish philanthropy is a part of the machinery of Zionism, and I want to understand it better. Amazing. So we're going to talk about some of these things, and we're going to also offer you more opportunities to dive deeper. 100% agree with all of this, as the Subway Takes guy likes to say. Um, I'll add one reason to care. So if you draw your attention to the slides, one reason that I think we ought to care about American Jewish philanthropy, why it's worth sort of being here to talk is because it's a very big sector. So it's really hard to estimate how much money sort of American Jews give to philanthropy. But there's a scholar named Jack Wertheimer who's tried to do so. And this chart is sort of an estimate from 2014, where he estimates that giving to Jewish causes in Israel was about $6 billion each year. And this was about a decade ago. So now that number is probably closer to $14 billion each year, given to either Jewish causes or to Israel. And that money, as folks have mentioned in the chat, can do a lot of harm and also a lot of good, with $1 billion of resources. When you break that down, there are a few different ways that Jewish Americans give tzedakah. So the on the red slice of the pie, the most common way continues to be direct donations from small donors, like all of us in this Zoom room. And we as small donors are joined by some big private foundations. So you may have heard of groups like the Jim Joseph Foundation, the Schusterman Foundation. There are a lot of different private Jewish family foundations that make up about a sixth of this total pie. Some people use a special vehicle called donor advised funds, which is about a 20th of the pie. And then finally, there are big organizations called federations, which our training today is going to focus on. If you want to know more about some of these organizations, definitely come back for the Money to Movement Lab. So, what are federations? In most cities and regions of North America, there are institutions that fundraise on behalf of the local Jewish community. They give about $1.5 billion each year to Jewish or Israeli causes, and they have growing endowments. So there's the money that federations give out each year, and then there's money that are stored in endowments, sort of resources for the future. And federations matter for a lot of different reasons, one of which is that they're an important institution of collective Jewish giving. They cater to a wide tent of American Jews across the ideological and religious spectrum, and they attract a lot of donors who want to see their local Jewish community thrive. At the same time, as we'll discuss, a lot of folks see them as increasingly out of touch with some of the concerns of American Jews, especially around issues like Israel-Palestine or racial climate or social justice. I'm curious if we go back actually to the chart, one slide, Jordan. Was this expected? Is this what everyone was expecting to see when you showed up to this training, or is there anything surprising in this chart? I see in the chat, Jen says, I swear I saw some statistic that the Federation was 3 billion last year or 2024, so they doubled in 10 years. Interesting. Yeah, very possible. And there's also, I mean, one thing to note that these are also sort of pre-October 7th numbers, and so that there's sort of a spike in giving to federations after October 7th. Um, Sam says, I'm surprised by how much is individual giving. We have more power than I thought. Amen. I thought foundations and federations were like 80%. Yeah, we have us everyday people. We do a lot. I was expecting more DAFs because they're tax advantaged. Absolutely. I mean, one thing to note about this is that these are federation sponsored DAFs. This is a little bit in the weeds, so it's not every donor advised fund in the US. It's just the ones that are sort of associated with Jewish communal institutions. Um, totally. So, next slide. Or actually, no, this slide, sorry. So we're here exactly because we are that other 50% of the pie chart. So we think that organizing ourselves can help us build power and resources to fight for a more just world. And we're focusing on federations today in part because Jewish Liberation Fund is building an important alternative to the federation model. A question we ask a lot in this container that we call our money, our movement is how we can build on the power of the federation model while also pressuring existing federations to change. And we hosted this training because we need your help, both to understand about how federations work, how they can be pressured. And like I said in the opening spiel, we'll share some knowledge today. And we're also hoping that some folks in the Zoom room might be interested in diving deeper with us in the summer and beyond. Um, and I'm just seeing from Brooke, does that mean non-federation DAFs are counted in the direct giving category? Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So I'm going to go into the history of a little bit, but we also, I think, have a lot of experts in the room. Does anyone know anything already about the history of your local federation, or how your local federation works? I'd love if you could drop a note or something in the chat. Meredith asks, is Combined Jewish Philanthropies a federation? Yes, absolutely. So Combined Jewish Philanthropies is sort of the merger of what used to be independent federations in the Massachusetts area. And then they all merged into this institution, I guess, called Combined Jewish Philanthropies. Brooke says, I just learned something that surprised me, which is that the LA Jewish Federation incubated the org that became the UFW. Interesting. Super interesting. Amazing. So feel free to keep adding ideas to the chat. I'll give a little bit of a history crash course. So the first federations emerged in the late 1890s in cities such as Boston, Cincinnati. Oh, all right, I'll keep checking. In cities such as Boston, Cincinnati, Chicago, and St. Louis, each of these cities had a rapidly growing immigrant population, and federations helped to centralize social services such as housing and healthcare in many of these cities. It's interesting that from the beginning of federations, there were a lot of clear class and ethnic divides. So the people in New York, for example, the people who gave to federations were often wealthier German Jews, whereas the people who needed social services were Eastern European Jewish immigrants, and there were some tensions, right, between who are the givers, who is receiving help. In 1932, many of these local federations started to network with each other through a group called the National Council of Jewish Federations and Welfare Funds. It's now known as Jewish Federations of North America. In a bit, I'll drop the link to JFNA in the chat if you want to learn more. The structure of the federation structure, centralizing giving, has made a really efficient fundraising system in American Jewish life. So in 1939, for example, the Central Council helped thousands of Jews escape Europe and resettle elsewhere. If you fast forward to the 1980s, Jewish federations also played a major role in helping Jews escape from the Soviet Union and resettle. So in other words, federations have done a lot of good for American Jews and global Jewry. And we want to state that sort of before we get to our critiques. And one major takeaway from this is that centralization can be quite powerful. So federations are often really successful in fundraising because they draw on a long Jewish history of giving to central funds, to giving as an expression of Jewish peoplehood, of Jewish morality and solidarity. After World War II, things start to get tricky, and the priorities of federations start to shift. So many bought into what Jewish studies scholars call the continuity crisis in American Jewish life. Post-war leaders panicked about what they saw as a growing assimilation of American Jews. They were afraid that Jews marrying non-Jews or not going to synagogue or not having kids might lead to the disappearance of Jewish life. And so federations, which sort of started with investments in various social services, started to allocate a growing amount of resources to growing Jewish identities. So nowadays, one reason, for example, that federations subsidize trips to Israel is because they believe that these trips are really important for fighting assimilation in North America. Um, they talk about this as valuing continuity, which often justifies major investments in free or subsidized Jewish education, which I'll say I personally benefited from. So in college, for example, I was able to go on a trip to the Ukraine that benefited from Jewish philanthropists who I will never know. And so if you've had similar experiences of sort of subsidized Jewish education or Jewish identity building experiences, feel free to sign off to let us know in the chat. Um, we think, though, that also there might be some potential in this value of continuity. So there's a great article in Jewish Voices by an author named J.J. Wilder that argues that care for Jewish continuity actually demands that we fight for example, a new Green Deal, right? So if we care about future generations of Jews, we should invest resources in making sure that that future world is inhabitable for future generations. Um, Finally, one issue that, right, someone brought up in the chat that often federations are sort of a vector for contemporary Zionism, that federations in their current iteration often function to censor dissent. There's a major in 2010, for example, there's a lot of attention on the San Francisco Federation. The board had voted that no group could receive funds from the Federation if they engaged in, quote, anti-Israel activity or expression. That included any groups that participated in the nonviolent boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And we don't really know nowadays how many federations continue to have these types of red lines, but I think that probably our experience in this room would suggest that it's very, very common and means that groups who are doing progressive work on Israel-Palestine really struggle to get funding. Um, at the same time, if we go to the next slide, there's also a really inspiring history of organizing to pressure federations to change their priorities, which is the history that we see ourselves building on. So in 1972, for example, there was a group called Concerned Jewish Students that showed up to a Federation General Assembly to demand greater investments in Jewish education. And they kind of succeeded, right? That nowadays there are significantly more funds for some kinds of Jewish education. And at the time they were students, and then they grew up to become sort of Jewish professionals, who in a lot of ways are sort of leading the contemporary Jewish world. And that legacy continues in modern campaigns. So on the right hand, there's a campaign image of a protest from Jewish Voice for Peace in Chicago, um, who ran a campaign called Defund Islamophobia, which drew attention to Federation funding going towards anti-Muslim hate groups. So there really is an inspiring history of not just being right passive recipients of funding from federations, but also organizing ourselves to demand different priorities. Um, and with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jean to talk a little bit about the Philadelphia Federation.
Yeah. Um, more than talking, kind of giving the details about the Philadelphia Federation, I just want to share my personal experience of how I, as someone who honestly had never really never really felt particularly connected to the local federation of where different places that I've lived, kind of how and why I started to think about that, and how the Movement to Money Lab helped me kind of deepen my analysis, both of the existing landscape of Jewish philanthropy and the way that power is wielded within that landscape, and really build tools to feel like I can participate in building an alternative. So I no longer live in Philadelphia, but the last place that I lived in the US was in Philadelphia. And I continue to be a member of, from a distance, of Kol Tzedek, which is a pro-ceasefire synagogue in Philadelphia that I feel really lucky to be connected to, if from afar. And my attention was really drawn to the personal implications that this kind of question of organized money and censorship has within the Jewish world, came to a head when a couple of years ago I was logging on through Zoom to services for Yom Kippur, and Rabbi Ari Lev told a story about how the Federation in Philadelphia had pulled sponsorship for, a citywide Shavuot event because of Kol Tzedek's participation. And, you know, the line that Ari Love shared and gave us permission to share with you is, it's not that we feel isolated, it's that we are. At the same time, I think that there's a lot of evidence that on the more grassroots level, even Jews who, you know, who have a wide variety of opinions on so many of these issues, really resist this kind of divisiveness. But that because federations have, you know, organized money, even though we saw that it's not even 50% of the Jewish philanthropy world, they're able to try to make an attempt to really like wield this power of censorship. And that is really like, that got me thinking. And it's what primed me to respond and immediately sign up when I got this email with the opportunity to join the Money to Movement Lab, which is really, you know, as I said, this opportunity to really deepen our analysis of the existing infrastructure through things like learning how to read the kind of form that we see on the slide in 990, and to really think about how does what Jewish institutions say that they're doing compared to what they are actually doing in practice, and how um, what are the tools that we can push for greater alignment around that? And so there are specific experiences of young people organizing with these kinds of tools in North Carolina, for example, with the 990, that are really inspiring and concrete examples that we have. And the Money to Movement Lab really, emphasizes us gaining the tools and experience that we need to contribute to organizing this other 50%, which could, even without moving the positions of institutions like the federations, could be even larger if we were to come together and be able to wield the power of the giving that we're all already doing on some level. And with that, I will pass it to Laura to kind of ground us in the even longer history of Jewish giving beyond, the 1800s when the federations emerged. And yeah, it's yours, Laura.
Thank you, Jean. I am switching up our spotlights. Here we go. Okay, great to be with you all. If just by show of hands, if you have a virtual hand ability, raise hand ability, or on screen, how many people have ever studied Talmud before? Or even know what Talmud is? Okay, cool. Um, Great. I see some thumbs up. Great. How many people are like, actually, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm really kind of a beginner here. Great. Love to see all those thumbs too. You're in the right place. Um, we have two little kernels of Jewish wisdom to share with you tonight to help ground what it is we're doing here, which is fundamentally exploring like why give in this way? What is JLF's approach? What are the deep roots from a Jewish perspective that even have led to giving being such a core and foundational part of Jewish practice. So here's the first. And actually, we're just going to learn this one together, and then we'll have a chance for, with the next one, for a little bit of learning in small groups, also to get to know each other a bit. So can I get a volunteer real quick to just hop off mute and read the English for this? You don't have to raise your hand, just unmute yourself. Okay. I believe
Sure.
in you.
I'll
Yes.
read it if no one else will.
Brooke. Thank you, Brooke.
Hi.
Take it away.
The Gemara cites a Baraita in which the sages taught, money for the charity fund is collected by two people and distributed by three people. It is collected by two people because one does not appoint an authority over the community composed of fewer than two people. And it is distributed by three people, like the number of judges needed in cases of monetary law, since the distributors determine who receives money and who does not, as well as how much each person receives.
Thank you. So this is from a section of Talmud from this great book of Jewish law and practice from about 2,000 years ago. Baba Batra has a lot to do with ownership, who owns what, how do we share resources, those questions. So I'm curious to hear, with this text in front of you, and knowing that kind of long before Federation started in the last part of the 1800s, like this has been a core part of Jewish practice. What stands out to you? What stands out to you from this text? What questions do you have? And you can drop that in the chat. You can highlight or pull out certain lines or phrases that you're curious about. So we have this interesting kind of give and take, right? It's held by some people, distributed by others, by different numbers of people. What's up with that? What other questions or noticings do people have? Thanks, Sam. It's cool that there are checks and balances for the allocation of community resources. Yes, there are. When I'm curious, Sam, when you say checks and balances, where do you see that in this text? You can either type in the chat or just hop off mute.
I see that in, for example, where it says you need three people to distribute the funds because that's how many people you need in the first place to decide if money is being used like improperly. So they're
Hmm.
saying we're not even going to enter a situation of uncertainty.
Hmm. Yeah. So what might be I'm pushing on this, but what might be the implications of that? Like what would happen if we only had one person or two people, or if we had 10 people deciding, like, what are the implications of that?
I mean, the money could go to that person's individual interests rather than the community interests. And because no one's watching, it would never be like determined clearly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts, other things that stand out to folks. Thanks,
When there
Sam.
are three people, that breaks a tie versus two. Still doesn't
Yeah.
explain why we have two that collect the money.
Yeah, I mean, raises questions for me. I'm like, ooh, how does JLF make decisions about grants? Maybe we'll find out more. How do we decide who gets the money and who's a part of that decision making? Um, yeah, Caroline says there's another discussion using information from outside this text, right, about which classes of people are allowed to sit on a court, but that's probably, yeah, the great thing to explore in another moment. And did I see a hand before? No, maybe not. Um, exactly. I think this raises some questions about what is mine, what is yours, what is ours, and what is mine, but maybe a portion of it should go toward an individual or collective needs. Um, when you have sort of when you're part of a process of redistributing resources or making funding decisions, who do you think needs to be involved in that? So we have the opinion of the Talmud right here. Um, we are not living in the same world that the Talmud has, and in our contemporary world, things have changed in some ways. I'm curious, like, what models you've seen out there. Again, you can drop in the chat or come off mute. What models have you seen out there for that maybe reflect two people collecting and three people distributing? And also, like, do you agree? How would you distribute funds? Okay, feel free to hop in if you want to. And I think we are going to move to our second little bit of Jewish wisdom, um, which is juicy in a different way. Um, and also, if I'm missing it, I'm switching between screens. If I'm missing anything in the chat, Joshua or Jane, just holler. Okay, let's go to our next one. So, for a bit of context, so this is also from the Talmud, also from some of our more ancient wisdom. Um, so the rabbis taught that we sustain the non-Jewish poor along with the Jewish poor, visit the non-Jewish sick along with the Jewish sick, and bury the non-Jewish dead along with the Jewish dead for the sake of peace. So this is a line, is a text from Gittin, this tractate, this section of the Talmud, talks a lot about, explores many different aspects of our responsibility to one another, particularly like relationally in all different ways. And this particular section is surrounded by some stories about really about like things we do for the sake of peace. So I have some big questions about like, what does it mean to do something for the sake of peace? Does that affect like the no, does that mean, are we doing it more full-hearted, less full-hearted? Like, what does that mean to do it for the sake of peace? So I have some questions for you all. And before we go into groups of 2 to 3, I just want to say, if you're sitting here and you're like, I am totally not in the mood to talk to someone right now, that's okay. You can stay in the main room. But I do want to invite you to try it out, and to try out talking to someone you haven't met before to see who maybe you'll get to meet from across the country or the world. Um, and some of the key questions I have are, maybe I will sort of drop this in the chat. I'm going to drop this in the chat. So like, where have you seen this play out? And where have you seen it not play out? When are those times when we, as I'm saying we, but when the Jewish community have maybe needed to be a little more insular or particularistic? And when are the times when it's been really important not to stay within that, and to, practice again and again, building community and solidarity across many lines of difference. So I'm going to drop these questions in the chat. So where have you seen this play out? Where have you seen it not play out in different ways, or not seen this play out? What is the balance that you think is right? Are you giving to Jewish justice organizations instead of or in addition to secular orgs? And maybe why? And I think similarly, maybe you're someone, I know that we have a number of people in the room who lead organizations, are starting organizations. Maybe you're someone who's thinking about the funding landscape. Like, when and how do you reach out to organizations that are funding Jewish things versus in non-Jewish spaces? Maybe you're working at the intersection of Judaism and justice in different ways. And how do you navigate that particularism and universalism? So thanks for joining, Jeremy. So we're going to go into some smaller groups just for the next 8 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and do a little brainstorming together. And again, this is opt-in. So I think Joshua, someone's gonna, there we go. We have an invitation to a breakout, and have fun. Try it out. See you back soon. And Jordan, I'm gonna stay in the main room.
Okay, cool. Well, first let me pause the recording. How long should we said
I said 8 minutes.
yeah, so we're ahead of schedule, so we should be fine, right?
Yep. But that will give us some time to talk together after.
Great. Let me find wherever the yeah. Coordinate. Nope, that's my screen sharing. In my defense, there's a big pause. Oh, here we go. Okay, great, thanks. I was like, we still have 30 seconds. But I do forget a lot.
Welcome back, everyone. Okay, great. Thanks for going there and trying it out for those who went to breakouts. And I'm curious to hear, just again, like, feel free to hop off mute or drop in the chat. Curious to hear, like, how that was for you. What came up? Any big themes or questions? B, Sam, Tamar.
Me and Jean talked about how actually a lot of the federation's work uh, does benefit non-Jewish people and is relatively non-selective, like in who can access their senior centers and who can access social services, which is interesting. Although I also like worry that that gives them undue influence by the same process.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Any other little kernels from, Meredith?
We were talking about like what is a good balance, and I'm not sure that there's an objective answer to that.
Sorry, can you say what the question was again? What is the
what is a good balance of donating
oh, what is a good balance?
not Jewish causes? Because you can have a narrow focus in activism and be valuable in that way. But you can also have a broad-based focus, and both of us, both me and Joshua, were like, we donate to Jewish organizations, but we also donate to secular organizations. And like, I think me by majority, I donate to secular organizations. And I don't go through any federated charities.
Yeah.
But what if someone is? What if you've got a more centrist donor who's Jewish donor who's like donating all of their money to Zionist colony? What what do you say to them? Is that the most effective
way that they could be helping the community, the Jewish
Mhm.
community.
Yeah, Meredith.
And I don't know, is like how much of it is giving is individualist, how much giving is collectivist.
Hmm.
And I think
I think,
ultimately for charities, you are always relying on the goodwill of the goodwill of people thinking about. You're relying on the goodwill of people who have money.
yes, and that these are like often different values that are in tension in all different ways. It doesn't mean that one is true and the other one's not true. Like I think most of these values are like universal values that are in tension in some way. Making sure, I don't know, universal access to food or making sure people have education. And to what extent do I care for those closest to me versus maybe further away from me? And what is my responsibility? Um, Caroline dropped in here. Oh, you got to talk with Gio. Great. Great conversation about different funding sources and balancing our intercommunal Jewish commitments of solidarity toward other communities and grassroots funding, recurring donations, membership dues to offset influence of large donors foundations. Yes. Um, we are going to wrap in a moment. Last call for any kernels of wisdom or takeaways that you want to hold on to. If not, I'm just going to invite you to give some shout outs and thanks in the chat for the person you got to talk with. It's always, I imagine a number of folks here got to talk with someone maybe you'd never had a conversation with. So thanks for learning a bit of Talmud. And as we go forward into the rest of our learning, I just want to say in particular that we've done, I know in JLF's work, we've done some practices around communal decisions around money. And we're going to transition into sharing a little bit about how JLF does that in a way that the most affected people are represented in the decision making. So this is something that we are trying to learn from these ancient values in practice today, in line with the way that we hope to be building the world we want to live in. And I'm going to turn it over to Jordan to talk about that.
Yes, hello everyone. It's your favorite JLF staff member here. Glad I got a laugh for that. Here to talk about, exactly how we're going to try and live up to these values. So, sort of to recap, we've talked a little bit about how centralization can lead to power and influence and how that can be used for good or for evil, which I didn't even realize was a part of the OJ song playing at the beginning, but it is. We've talked a little bit about the lack of transparency in philanthropic entities. And we've talked about how Jewishly we're called to more collective forms of decision making, where it's not just uh, one or two people making decisions. I mean, you said 10, we're at like 20 right now, but we'll get into that a little bit later, hopefully to be increasing as time goes, and how we're called to care about other communities as well. And the reason that I'm here, obviously as a staff member, is this event is to talk about why the work that we do at the Jewish Liberation Fund is one of the answers. So the Jewish Liberation Fund, sort of like drawing inspiration from some of those efforts that Joshua talked about earlier in the early 20th century, is disrupting the current status quo in Jewish philanthropy. We grow the capital, culture, and conditions that the Jewish left needs to win. Through participatory grant making, grassroots donor organizing, and philanthropic transformation, JLF is building an alternative model for funding our social movements, one that's rooted in safety, dignity, and opportunity for each and every one of us. So there's three pillars to our work that are sort of baked into our mission statement. And the first is participatory grant making. So I'm curious if anyone knows anything about our grant making process. And I know at least one person here knows something about our grant making process because they're on our grant making team. So I'm expecting something in the chat. But please, if you know anything about our grant making process, whatever you know, would love to hear something in the chat, or feel free to come off mute and say something. Let me call on someone. Great, great. Thank you. Thank you. Jen, yes. Our grant making is led by Jews of color, Sephardim, and Mizrahim. The sort of important part of it is it's participatory. And so sort of in the vein of what Rabbi Laura was talking about in terms of how we make decisions, uh, in a lot of places, decision making for how funding is allocated is done by the people who give the money, the donors. And oftentimes it creates sort of like a level of disconnection between the actual communities that these funds are dedicated towards supporting and the people who are making decisions about where these funds are most used. Our part of our theory of change is that giving the people in communities, so it's not just that it's Jews of color, Sephardim, and Mizrahim, but it's also that they come from a series of recommendations from across movement leaders, some from our grantees, some not from our grantees, and people who are respected across the movement. And it's sort of about taking power in terms of the decision making of how funding is used from the donor class and moving it to the movement itself and people who are deeply rooted in it. At all stages, both from our LOI review at stage one of our grant making from our steering committee and our community grant making team process, who's currently, I guess, currently about to start reviewing the second stage. Um, it's movement activists from those identity groups. The second part of our work, and this is really what we're here to talk about today, um, is grassroots donor organizing. Grassroots donor organizing that builds the grassroots skills we need to fund our movement and growing a base of Jewish donors to run campaigns to challenge institutional Jewish philanthropy. So you'll learn a little bit more about what that looks like specifically in this call, but we're sort of at an early stage right now in terms of our political education to be able to bring people into this work. When you hear about the Money to Movement Lab, which is going to be links to later, opportunities to have a one-on-one with one of our organizers or myself, which you're going to hear about later, um, this is about beginning to build the base of people who see philanthropy as one of the things that is necessary that we need to change and build an alternative of our own for to be able to sufficiently challenge institutional Jewish philanthropy and change the landscape of what our Jewish community and movement funding looks like. One of the cool things that people who've come to Money to Movement Lab is what, as part of it, you're going to fundraise for JLF, but people who have gone on have taken the skills, and we've seen huge grassroots increases from people who go back to their own organizations year over year, being able to substantially increase their funding. And the last part of it is philanthropic transformation, which is about working within philanthropy and providing individuals who are currently a family or larger Jewish institutional foundations with a practice and community of support for making changes within their organizations. As we spoke about earlier, there's a huge amount of money in these places, and if we can cause them to change both via our agitation and having operatives inside, our movement will be stronger. That's what our Brick by Brick Fellowship is about, which is for those philanthropic leaders pictured there. And the last part of our mission that's important to highlight is we're looking to build a world that's rooted in safety, dignity, and opportunity for each and every one of us. That means that we're rooted in love of humanity, from America to Israel to Palestine, Jews, non-Jews, uh, rich people, working class, poor, etc. Every single one of us, humans on this planet, deserve kavod habriot, which is to be treated with the sacred principle of human dignity. The organizations that we fund and the movement that we support are organizations sort of like what we talked about in Rabbi Laura's Learning, who are fighting for that more just world. Not just for Jewish continuity, not just for us, not just for our people, but for every one of us sharing this planet. So I know I've talked a little bit about, our grantees, et cetera. You know, I'd be curious to hear if we have a second in the chat, if we'll get some participation here. What does the Jewish progressive movement mean to you? Jewish progressive movement, Jewish left, any of those things. Let's say Jewish left then. Okay, Jewish left. Is that better, Tamar? For those who didn't read the chat, Tamar said nothing. I hate the word progressive. creative ritual. Yeah, a lot of organizations are doing, coming up with new creative rituals, whether it's for things like gender nonconforming people, whether it's for whether it's for just people who want to see justice as more of a core part of what their rituals look like, represents or makes space for the next generation of Jewish leaders that does not feel it has a home in current Jewish Federation yet led spaces. Yeah, absolutely. People who are developing leaders who wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do that, sometimes because of their politics or identity in more traditional spaces. Yeah, any communal Jewish communal infrastructure that doesn't funnel people into conservatism. Yes, Sam, 100%. Yeah, I think that's one of the things. I talk a lot about with even my family in this moment, right? Like, how do we um, resist that slide? How do we resist that slide? People who invest in leadership development training for organizers. Yeah, absolutely. Like the Collaborative for Jewish Organizing, one of our previous grantees. I think that's the collaborative you're talking about. Um, okay, well, okay, I can't. Okay, now you guys have gone so hard in the chat that I can't actually keep up. Um, but this is a sample of our grantees that you can take a look at here. And we're currently in grant making, so stay tuned. We're gonna have a big announcement in a couple months with our 2026 grantees. I'll go ahead and throw the full list in the chat if anyone is just like interested. I know we've seen a couple people shout out. Caroline just being the last person who posted in the chat as one of our at one of our grantees, halachic left. But what do you notice about our grantees here? You don't have to post in the chat for this one because you guys have been going so hard there. But we have a number of issue areas, everything from immigrant justice, care for incarcerated people, reclaimment of the Yiddish language, the movement for peace, safety, and dignity for everyone in Israel, Palestine. And we have a number of different strategies. There's spiritual nourishment, communities like that, to local broad-based organizing, to leadership development, to just like the organizations who sort of form the connective tissue of our movement. I've seen so many people talking about all these different types of things as what the Jewish left uh, means to them. And so much of this work is under-resourced all across the nation. The people who are here from our grantees in the chat, I think, can tell you. Oftentimes, we're the only institutional funder that our grantees have access to, and we exist to change what philanthropy looks like for these people. And when you talk to them about this work, they'll tell you the difference and how it feels to work with Jewish Liberation Fund. So we have a couple quotes, although hey, if you're one of our grantees and you want to throw something in the chat, you just throw a chat about you just throw something in there about how great it feels to work with JLF. I welcome you to do that. But our impact is not just about I'm not going to read these, but you can go ahead and you guys can go ahead and read the quotes that continue talking. But our impact is not just about the capital we allocate as part of our grant making process. It's about the culture that we're building. So all of these collaborations and offerings with grantees, we do political education. We do have an organizational development series that's designed to help based on the needs of our grantees as they report to sort of help them on a journey towards becoming more robust and successful organizations, having connections to each other. One of the things that we've launched this year is our Launchpad grant, which is going to feature a cohort for organizations who feel like they're right on the cusp of being able to become more robust. And then just like fundraising training. In addition to being a values aligned funder, one of the only funders that they can truly speak their values to, has a positive impact on the movement more broadly. And beyond that, we're always working to improve our process. This is another quote, which is about providing clarity and support for grant applicants through the process. They have the opportunity to ask questions at stage one of our process, to meet with our program officers, to get feedback and advice on their application in stage two. And we're one of the only funders who give clear feedback why unfunded applications were not successful in a given year. So whenever organizations are not funded, our community grant making team is asked to provide that feedback. I mean, for those of you who apply for grant funding regularly, can you throw in the chat how many of your funders that you're familiar with do all of those things? I don't actually know how many people here, apply for grants regularly, but we got not too many, not too many. with a bunch of thumbs up on it. Thank you. So we've talked about, yeah, not too many exactly. These are the things that we do that are committed to changing the culture in which our philanthropic landscape operates. So as we've talked about some of our grantees, I'd like you all to participate in a brief exercise. We've established the JLF Values Participatory Grant making it at our current size, which is giving away around $600,000 a year, which sounds like a lot, but again, compared to some of those larger institutions, is not nearly that much. We prioritize having movement leaders who we get recommendations from making those decisions. But what if it was you? What if you had the opportunity to fund organizations in your community? What if we had billions of dollars to fund the work that you cared about? What could our movement accomplish? And so we're going to go into breakout rooms really quickly. I think Rabbi Laura is getting those set, and I'm going to. Wait. I'm gonna post it. I'm gonna post this in the chat. Okay, I'm not posting the thing that's exactly there, but hopefully you can remember it because it's close enough. But what if it was you? What would you fund in your community, locally? What could our movement accomplish? And go ahead and talk about that in the breakouts. Great to see you, Amanda. Thanks for joining. Hope you enjoy meeting my sister. All right. And figuring out how to pause recording. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back. Nice to see all your faces for like a second, for like a second. Would love a quick share out. Anyone, I mean, you could throw it in the chat. But I would honestly, I'd love someone to come off mute. I love when someone comes off mute. You always just what came up in one of your breakouts? Caroline, I see you off mute.
Sure. Rabbi Laura Bellows and I, honestly, we mostly just like schmoozed, and talked about our respective organizations, and our funding uh, sources and um, issues, that come up. We didn't really honestly talk about if we had billions of dollars, what we would do.
Although I will say at the end of our conversation, one of the things that came up is this question of like kind of scarcity versus abundance.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, the question even of like, what if we had billions of dollars to fund this work? When I saw that question from you, Jordan, the first thought I had was like, if only, like if only. And may it be that we have like lots of resources to fund this work. So I think the question of like connecting people with funding sources and sharing, like helping connect people who want to give to support these causes with each other, with people they can give to, like that is net good for this broader work. That's what I'll say.
Thank you, Rabbi Laura. And thanks, Caroline, I guess. Just kidding, just kidding. Anyone else? Anyone else have an interesting share out?
I'll share one thing that came up in our group was thinking about um, funding spaces um, for new smaller communities. So just on the Jewish side, I mean, there's a general like we should fund more organizing to change the world and make it the place we want it to be, but also a desire for more funding for new smaller Jewish spaces and for folks to be able to have spaces that don't fund Israel and to be able to buy ritual objects and other items in ways or kosher food that are not connected to Israel for folks for whom that's not something they want to be doing.
Yeah, thank you, Brooke. Yeah, and that's one of the things that when you see along our grantee list, a lot of those small spiritual communities, we have a lot of them applying, so we gotta, we gotta figure out how to had 154 applications this year, and a lot of them were small spiritual communities. So we gotta figuring out how to with a limited amount of money, um, resource them and help make them stronger. But it's super important. Both like have Jewish culture too, not just organizing, not just politics, but like uh, a robust Jewish culture that does share our values. Any other share outs? I'll take room for one more before we get ready to get into our closing.
I'll share just because I haven't really heard this angle, which is that I work for a newsroom and I believe very deeply in the power of narrative change. And one thing we've seen as a newsroom that covers Gaza and Israel a lot from a critical lens is we have a lot of small dollar donors who want to support that work and not a lot of major donors. And we won't survive unless we build capacity in that area. And I've especially been disappointed to see the struggle building capacity in Jewish philanthropy. And I think that the end result of this is going to mean a suppression of narratives of dissent or narratives on the left, and that's something that I'm concerned about. So if I had billions of dollars, I would put it towards news and narrative change. And the other thing I talked about is we have a lot of donors who feel very isolated in their beliefs, who live in communities where they feel like their entire friend groups are not on the same political page, and if they speak up, they'll kind of lose their communities. And so we've been trying to think about how to create physical in-person spaces for people to meet and learn about each other and learn about our work.
Yeah, that's really important. I think like one of our funding categories is that media and narrative development, and it's one of the ones that I wish we were able to see so like more than we have so many spiritual communities, and it's like that's one of the ones that we don't see so many applications in, and part of that is probably because it just like requires a certain amount of like resource dedication just like upfront to be able to like fund that work in a meaningful way, fund that work in a meaningful way. So thanks for bringing that up, Celine. So, as we continue on, just sort of thinking like, we would be able to highlight these different narratives if we were able to fund the work with billions of dollars. We would be able to have different spiritual communities that we'd be able to find Judaica. I never even realized until I was hosting a Passover Seder and I go to the place in New York close to my dad's house and it's just like literally everything is like made in Israel and I was like, whoa, that's crazy. Didn't realize that. Like you would be able to find Judaica that did not come from Israel uh, if we had billions of dollars to fund this work. We would be able to have like a beautiful, robust Judaism that didn't necessitate that where people weren't getting frozen out from broader communities for not even just like towing the line on the Zionist political project if we had billions of dollars to fund this work. Well, so I'm here to tell you that if we organize that other 50%, that this is possible. It's possible if we organize that other 50% that we're a part of, we can build an alternative to the Federation that shares our values. We also believe both to fund the Jewish cultural work that is like so important to so many of us, but also to use its power to uplift and connect our movement, not to silence it, freeze it out, and isolate it. We also believe we can forge a path for institutional Jewish philanthropy to change by supporting individuals working within it and agitation from the outside. We're at step like 0.5 of that. It's like really, really incredibly early in this entire project. But that's like 75% of this entire thing, like a huge part of the puzzle. Uh, it's totally possible for us to begin to build that world where all of those things we talk about are funded, are robust, and are sort of like what it means to be a Jewish person in the world. And so what's that mean? It means that it's time to get involved with JLF at step 0.5. We're still very early. Uh, through our money, our movement, which is kind of like our term for this broad organizing container, which you would learn more about if you come and join the Money to Movement Lab. That's sort of like the first step in getting involved with this. You could also, honestly, if you want to have a one-on-one with one of us, just like throw that in the chat and just be like, reach out to me for a one-on-one. I've already had one-on-ones with some of you. Um, and you can send these links to your friends, the links that are going to be posted in the chat in like 2 seconds. But I'm going to throw it to Jean to tell you one more time about sort of like what the Money to Movement Lab experience was like as someone who's a recent participant and like why she's involved here now.
Yeah. As I've been stressing, it was just a really, really transformative and positive experience for me to go from participating in Jewish community locally, often sort of informally, like I feel very confident and love leading ritual that is really grounded in justice values, but had never really thought about the sort of like institutional landscape particularly deeply. And so to just really invite anyone who, and there are all different levels, a lot of folks who were there had given it a lot more thought. At sort of a structural level. And so I really think that it's a space where there's something for everyone. It's really an important cohort experience. And I know this year we're going to emphasize like community building and cohort building even more strongly. And so I know a lot of folks have brought up, experiences of isolation. And for me, especially someone like living outside the US, that was a really important place to have the opposite experience and really be growing and um, gaining these tools for analysis and also really, really concrete organizing tools. How do you talk to your friends about becoming largely small dollar donors? Maybe some of them could become big dollar donors, I don't know. um, who really can get behind this vision for justice. And so there are workshops like, storytelling for donor organizing, as well as I sort of previewed before, these sort of more analytical tools of like, how do we um, gain the tools to be able to analyze like what are our local federations actually funding specifically, and where might the pressure points be where, we might be able to move some of that. Yeah, so just really invite you to think about signing up. The link is on the slide. I think it's soon to be in the chat. And to also stress, if anyone is not quite sure if it's a good fit, feel free to reach out about a one-on-one. I'm happy, if my experience would be helpful as a place to start with a one-on-one, I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone. And I know that there are lots of other folks who can field one-on-ones for different kinds of questions.
And
In the chat. Okay.
I've gotten a message to speak to the just like exactly what to expect. No, if I move that over, if I'm actually looking at the interest form or the form itself right now. So the Money to Movement Lab will be, I believe it's 8 sessions this year, including one optional session from September through December. It's about every other week on Thursday evenings on the East Coast. It'll be, I guess, Thursday afternoons if you're on the West Coast. Um, in the sessions, yeah, you'll learn more about jail. I mean, I guess that's all written on there. So the specifics of it are it's going to be a little bit of political education, things like diving more into the 990s, like Gene talked about, and sort of like the capstone for it all is a fundraiser. You're going to fundraise for JLF with a group of people. You do make a meaningful gift, although it is otherwise free. Our hope is that this sort of like bringing people together will help us begin to create a container of people who are all really like excited and jazzed and have some shared analysis around what we're trying to do together to fund the Jewish left. Um, and sort of like have that as a first step in terms of, hey, you come through that and then you can come get involved with the political education group, potentially start working on some long-term campaigns or other exciting projects with JLF. Or like, hey, you can join this, or you could potentially go in and become a facilitator. Or you could even like, learn about fundraising, house parties, things like that. So, so there's all kinds of, there's a whole set, that's the optional sessions. If you decide you want to just like host a Hanukkah party and fundraise there, like totally, totally cool and a fun thing that a lot of different people have done. But, our goal is both to get people have a deeper relationship with JLF, um, feel a level of accountability for like moving money towards our movement and feeling like they know how to actually organize money towards the movement. And those skills, again, would be useful and have been useful for people who have gone on to lead fundraisers for their own organizations. Uh, and to begin to get people in our sort of like organizer pipeline, like give people the opportunity to come in with a level of engagement with JLF to then begin to join our political education team or uh, begin to, think about campaigns or just like to continue doing our fundraiser training, etc. So that's sort of what it looks like and what you'd be signing up for. And again, it's totally free, although we are going to ask you to fundraise for JLF and make a meaningful gift, whatever that does mean to you. So I think because me jumping on there was a little bit of an ad lib with a private message, but I think that we're all set now. If anyone has any questions, we're all gonna hang on for a little bit to just like chat. You want to stay on to be like, hey, like I want to have a one-on-one, that'd be great. You want to just tell us what you thought or like how you'd like to, if you're interested in being involved, just have more questions. We are here for a few minutes anyway, not forever, to answer some questions. But thank you, all of you, for like coming and being a part of this. We love and appreciate you and hope to hear from you soon. Hope to hear from you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Bye,
All right,
Rebecca.
well,
We'll be in touch.
okay. Well, let me find the pause recording button. Stop recording. Okay, great.
I just